My name is Mara Bellamy, and I was 36 years old the morning my mother texted me before sunrise, like she was contacting a bank and not a daughter. No hello, no how are you, no question about the business I had built from a borrowed desk and a second-hand printer. Just 4 words and a period. The mortgage is due. By then I had paid the mortgage on my parents' house 108 times. 108 drafts from my business account, $1,285 each. Arriving on the first of every month with the kind of faithfulness my family mistook for permission. I had paid the property taxes, the septic repair, the furnace replacement, the roof insurance deductible, 2 of my brother's rent emergencies, and 3 of my father's cardiology bills. But when I found my parents' will, my name appeared exactly once, and only in a sentence, explaining why I was getting nothing. It said I had already been provided for. I read that sentence in my car outside their house, while the porch light blinked above the door I had been keeping over their heads for 9 years. I read it once, then again, then a third time because numbers can be cruel. But words written by people you love can be crueler. And what I did after that was not loud. It was not dramatic. I did not scream. I did not post. I did not make a scene in the kitchen. I simply turned off the auto-pay. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary women stop begging to be counted and let the documents speak for them. If you have ever been the person everyone relied on, but no one respected, this story will know your name. Tell me where you are listening from, and subscribe so the next quiet reckoning finds you too. I run a forensic bookkeeping practice in Harlow Creek, Ohio, the kind of work people call boring until the money goes missing. I reconcile contractor accounts, clean up small businesses after divorces, find the payment that should not have been made, and the receipt someone hoped no one would open. I am good with patterns. I notice where numbers repeat, where they disappear, where a story says one thing and the ledger says another. That skill made me useful. In my family, useful became a personality before I was old enough to know I had other choices. My mother, Elaine, had a soft voice that could turn any request into a moral test. My father, Robert, believed in tradition, with the confidence of a man who had never paid the full price of one. And my younger brother, Caleb, was the son. That was not a description. It was a legal status, a weather system, a reason the whole house leaned toward him, even when he was standing still. Caleb was 2 years younger, handsome, in the unfinished way people excuse too long, always between jobs, always almost ready to start over. When he wrecked a car, it became a family emergency. When he missed rent, it became an opportunity for us to help him get steady. When I graduated with my accounting certificate, my father said, "Good. Now you can help your mother with taxes." I owned a small condo 48 minutes away, close enough to drive when someone called and far enough to pretend I had a life they could not reach. The pretending was the mistake. A call from my parents' number had its own rhythm. It started with concern, moved into a bill, and ended with me transferring money while my mother said, "You're such a blessing. Honey." Blessing is a beautiful word until you realize it has been turned into a payment method. For years, I told myself this was love. Daughters do things. Daughters remember medicine names and insurance renewal dates. Daughters drive in rain because their father's blood pressure machine is blinking a code nobody wants to look up. I was raised to be the one who looked things up. I just never looked up what my own family had written about me when they thought I was not in the room. 9 years before that morning text, the Mill Road house almost went under. It sat on 2.5 acres outside Harlow Creek, a long white ranch with green shutters, a detached garage, and a maple tree my father treated like an heirloom. He had retired early after a shoulder injury at the plant, and my mother had never worked outside the house. They had refinanced twice when money was easier and called it breathing room. Then the breathing room ended. The letter from the lender arrived in January. My mother read it to me over the phone like it was written in another language. Acceleration, default, foreclosure review. I drove out that night, my tires hissing on a blacktop road edged with dirty snow, and found my parents at the kitchen table with the envelope between them. Caleb was not there. He had a band practice, which is what he called 3 men in a garage talking about songs they never finished. The bank would not refinance 2 retirees with weak credit and no current income. The numbers were ugly and precise. They needed cash to clear the arrears, a borrower the bank would trust, and a person with enough credit to carry the new note. They needed me. I was 27. My business had just become stable enough that I could sleep through a month without checking the account 3 times a night. I had savings, clean credit, and the fatal combination of guilt and competence. The closing attorney was a woman in a grey suit who kept looking at me, not them. She said, "Mara, you understand that if you take this loan, the risk is yours?" I said I understood. She said, "Then you will not take the risk for nothing." That was why the new deed was structured the way it was. My parents granted me the majority share in exchange for the cash I brought to cure the default and the loan I took on as primary borrower. 66% in my name, 34% remaining with them. A tenant in common structure. Recorded at the county office. Signed in blue ink, notarized on a Thursday afternoon while my mother cried with relief, and my father called it a temporary arrangement. "Just paperwork," he said. I believed him. That may be the saddest sentence in this whole story. Not because he lied, though he did. Because the paper was the only honest thing in that room, and I was the only one who did not understand it yet. After the refinance, the mortgage came out of my business account automatically. $1,285 on the first of every month. I set it up because that is what reliable people do. They reduce friction. They make sure no one has to feel the panic again. The first year, my mother thanked me every month. By the second year, she thanked me every few months. By the third year, it was simply the way things worked, like the mailbox at the road or the porch light at dusk. Then came the extras. The furnace died in February during a week so cold the windows filmed with ice on the inside. I paid $7,400 because my father said the estimate stressed his blood pressure. The roof leaked over the den 2 summers later. I paid the deductible, and the difference insurance did not cover. A special drainage assessment hit the county road, and my mother slid the notice across the table with the fragile face she used when she wanted me to feel cruel for reading the total out loud. Caleb's emergencies floated in, around the edges. A security deposit, a car payment, a gap in his health insurance. My father said, "He's trying. Mara, a man needs a little help before he can stand." No one ever asked how I stood. They treated my stability like a natural resource, like rainwater in a barrel, something that appeared because it was supposed to. At Sunday dinners, the future of the house came up often. My father would talk about the maple tree and the garage and how the place needed a man's hand after he was gone. Caleb would nod, as though the conversation were about his birthright and not a property I was legally carrying. My mother would look at me and say, "You'll always have your own life, sweetheart. Caleb needs roots." I never pushed hard. I pushed gently. There is a kind of pushing daughters are taught to do, small enough not to be accused of disrespect. Maybe Caleb could help with the taxes. I said once. Maybe we could all sit down and write the finances out clearly. I said another time. My father answered with the same phrase every time. Family doesn't nickel, and dime family. I accepted that sentence because I wanted to be family. I did not notice that I was the only one being told not to count. My father's heart event came in late March. Not a movie collapse, not a hand to the chest at dinner, but a strange grey sweat while he was pruning the maple tree. My mother called me before she called 911. I want you to hear that. In the order it happened. Before the ambulance, before the cardiologist, before the neighbors. She called me because in that house, I was the emergency plan. He survived with 2 stents and a folder of discharge instructions nobody else read. I read them. I learned the medication schedule, set up the pill organizer, called the insurance company twice, and sat on hold with the pharmacy while my mother told visitors how frightening it all had been. After a brush with death, people want paperwork done. So my parents visited an estate lawyer in town. A week later, my mother handed me a grocery bag of papers and asked me to organize them. Bank statements, insurance forms, warranty papers, my father's new medication list, and at the very bottom, a fresh envelope from the lawyer's office. I knew what it was before I opened it. I also knew I should not open it. But I am a woman who reads documents before filing them, and they had handed it to me. The will was 6 pages long. My mother and father left all real estate, vehicles, personal property, bank accounts, and household possessions to their son, Caleb Bellamy. There was a single sentence about me. Their daughter, Mara, has been sufficiently provided for during our lifetimes and shall receive no further share of this estate. Sufficiently provided for. I sat at my kitchen table with the will under the lamp and my hands flat on either side of it. I had just spent a month managing my father's prescriptions. I had just covered a $3,900 emergency dental bill because his blood thinners complicated the procedure. I had spent 9 years keeping the bank from taking the house, and they had turned that into proof that I needed nothing. It is hard to explain the silence that comes after a betrayal that is not spoken aloud. Nobody screamed. Nobody slammed a door. There was only a clean white piece of paper telling me exactly where I stood. I put the will back in the envelope. I filed it neatly in their folder. Then I sat in my car outside my condo for almost an hour and let the old version of myself leave without making a sound. I went to dinner the next Sunday because habits outlive dignity, if you let them. My mother made roast chicken with the lemon potatoes. Caleb liked. Tessa Ryan was there. Caleb's fiancée, bright and efficient, already more interested in the house than Caleb had ever been. She walked through the rooms with a measuring tape app on her phone, tapping walls and saying things like, "We could open this up. My father sat at the table with his pill organizer beside him and talked about legacy. He said a man needed to know his name carried on. He said the Mill Road place had always been meant for the son. My mother nodded, relieved by the old shape of things. Caleb smiled into his plate. Tessa asked if the garage could be converted into a workshop or rental suite. I asked, quietly, where I fit into that plan. My father looked genuinely confused, which was worse than anger. He said, "You have your business. You have your condo. Caleb needs a start." I said, "I have also paid the mortgage for 9 years. The room made that tiny shift rooms make when someone says the forbidden accurate thing." My mother reached for the water pitcher, like the conversation had become too hot to touch. My father said, "Family helps because family is family. We don't keep a ledger." Caleb finally looked at me. It was not gratitude in his face. It was irritation. The kind of irritation people feel when the background noise becomes a voice. He said, "Come on, Mara. You know Mom and Dad always intended the house to stay with me. You were just helping. Just helping." That is another sentence people use when they are trying to keep the person holding the floor from noticing the foundation. I passed the potatoes. I asked about my father's follow-up appointment. I drove home with the radio off and the word son moving around in my head like a key in the wrong lock. I had spent years trying to earn a seat at a table where the seating chart had been written before I was born. That night, I opened my bank app, found the automatic mortgage payment, and tapped cancel. No speech, no threat, no letter, just silence where $1,285 used to be. The first of the month came with rain. I woke early, made coffee, and sat at my desk with a client's payroll report open, while some part of me waited for the sky to split. Nothing happened. The sun rose behind a grey window. My inbox filled with ordinary things. The payment did not leave my account. On the 3rd, the lender app sent me the first notice. Past due. A red flag in a system that had never had to wave one before. I read it, saved it, and closed the app. There is a particular kind of discipline in doing nothing, when your whole identity has been built around fixing things before anyone else feels them. My thumb hovered more than once. I could have paid it in 15 seconds. I could have made everyone comfortable again. I could have preserved the peace and called it love. Instead, I washed my coffee cup and went to work. On the 6th, my mother called. She opened with confusion, not accusation, because confusion is softer and gives the target a chance to apologize first. "Honey, the mortgage company says something didn't clear. Maybe your account changed." I said the account was fine. The pause on her end was small but real. Then the tone shifted. "Mara, your father cannot handle this stress. You know what the doctor said?" There it was. his heart placed on the table like collateral. I cared about my father's heart. That was why the tactic worked for so long, I said. I'm glad you mentioned stress. We should discuss the will. My mother breathed out sharply. The will has nothing to do with the mortgage. It does if I have been paying for a house I do not count in. I said. She told me I was making things ugly. She told me family did not treat family like a transaction. She told me I had always been the reasonable one. I heard every old hook in her voice, each one baited with a version of myself I no longer wanted to be. I did not bite. I told her we would talk soon and hung up before she could cry. By nightfall, she had called 5 more times. I let them go unanswered. For the first time in 9 years, the house on Mill Road could hear what my silence sounded like. Caleb called the next morning. His voice had the offended confidence of a man who had never had to balance a checkbook under pressure. He said Mom was beside herself. He said Dad had been up half the night. He said I was turning a paperwork misunderstanding into a war. I asked if he wanted to pay the mortgage. He laughed because he thought I was being absurd. Then he said, "You're the accountant. You're good at this stuff." I said, "And you are the heir. You should be good at inheriting the bill." He went quiet. People who inherit houses in their imaginations rarely include the monthly payment. He told me I was jealous. He said I was punishing him because our parents trusted him with the family home. He said a woman with no husband and no kids did not need acreage. That last part came out too fast, as though he had not meant to reveal the sentence living under the others. Tessa approached it with cleaner hands. Months earlier, she had added me to a renovation app under the name Mill Road Future. At the time, I assumed it was an attempt to include me. I should have known better. That week, the app began lighting up. White cabinets, wide plank flooring, a farmhouse sink, a note about removing the wall between the kitchen and den, a contractor estimate pinned to the top, $52,800, deposit due on signing. The caption read, "Caleb says Mom can use savings for the down payment once Mara calms down." Once Mara calms down. They had not waited for my parents to die. They were planning to spend the savings now. Savings I had helped rebuild, to renovate a house I was still paying for and legally owned. They were measuring rooms while I was being shamed for noticing the mortgage. I screenshotted the board. Every image, every caption, every estimate. A bookkeeper's first prayer is preservation. You preserve before you argue. The old me would have called immediately. The new me backed everything up in 3 places and made an appointment with a real estate attorney named Gwen Calder. Some truths are too important to say until you know exactly where the county recorded them. Gwen Calder's office sat above a hardware store on Main Street. 2 rooms, old brick walls, and a conference table polished by decades of hard conversations. She wore reading glasses on a chain and had the calm, almost bored expression of someone who liked facts better than drama. I liked her immediately. I gave her the refinance folder, the deed, the settlement statement, the mortgage history, the will, and the renovation screenshots. She did not react quickly. Good lawyers do not perform surprise. They read. After 20 minutes, she looked up and said, "Mara, this is much cleaner than people usually bring me. That was the first comfort I had felt in weeks. She pulled the recorded title from the county database while I sat there. There it was again. Not in my memory, not in a closing packet, but in the public record. Mara Bellamy, 66% tenant in common. Robert and Elaine Bellamy, combined 34%. I was the majority owner of the Mill Road house. I was also the primary borrower on the mortgage. Gwen explained it slowly, though I already understood the shape. A will can only transfer what the person who died actually owns. My father's will could not leave Caleb my share of the property any more than he could leave Caleb the moon. No sale, refinance, structural, renovation, or title change could happen without my signature. If Caleb and Tessa knocked down a wall without consent, they would be creating liability on a property mostly mine. I asked about the mortgage. You are responsible to the lender, she said, because your name is on the note. But responsibility to the bank is not the same thing as free responsibility to your family. You can require a written cost-sharing agreement. You can force a partition if necessary. You can offer to buy them out. You can let Caleb take over payments if that is what the family insists is fair. But the important thing is this: you have options. They do not get to write you out of a house they already signed you into. I sat with that sentence. They do not get to write you out. Some sentences arrive late, but they still arrive. My mother was not finished. When private guilt failed, she took the story to the town. She wrote in the Harlow Creek community group, the one people used for lost dogs and church suppers, about aging parents and children who forget who raised them. She said there comes a time when you learn which child truly loves you. She did not name me. She did not have to. By afternoon, there were prayer hands under the post, a casserole offer, a comment from a woman who wrote, "Some daughters get too big for their families." A cousin I had not heard from in 3 years sent me a message asking how I could abandon my father after his heart scare. Nobody asked how many payments I had made. Public sympathy is rarely interested in invoices. I almost answered. I drafted the post in my head with dates and totals and documents attached. Then I deleted it before it existed. My mother wanted a stage where feeling could beat fact. I would not meet her there. A community group is built for emotion, not evidence. My venue would be a dining room with witnesses and folders. And after that, if the town wanted a story, the town could have the corrected one. My cousin June was the first person to ask my side. She called quietly from her parked car outside work. I told her everything: the will, the 108 payments, the recorded deed, the renovation board. She listened without interrupting, which is a kind of love people underestimate. When I finished, June said, "Mara, they made you the bank, and then got offended when you charged interest." I laughed for the first time in a month, not because it was funny, but because it was so cleanly true. She asked what I needed. I said, "Come to the dinner when I ask. Sit near the back. Bring your phone charged. Not to film a fight." I told her. To remember accurately. I was done being the only one with a memory in that family. The accidental group text arrived on a Thursday night. It was called House Plan. 4 participants: my mother, my father, Caleb, and Tessa. Then for 90 seconds. 5. Tessa added me by mistake. Probably because my name sat too close to my mother's in her contacts. By the time she removed me, the conversation had already downloaded. I scrolled upward with the stillness of someone reading a confession. Elaine. She always comes around when she thinks Dad is in danger. Give it time. Caleb. She'll fold before Thanksgiving. She can't help herself. Tessa. Contractor wants deposit. We need to know if the payment situation is fixed. Robert. Once the place is Caleb's, this stops being her problem anyway. My father wrote that, not my brother. Not Tessa with her measuring app. My father, whose medication I organized, whose stents I worried over, whose house I had saved, wrote that one day the house would be Caleb's, and I would stop being his problem. I felt something inside me close. Not slam. Close. A quiet latch. There are betrayals you can negotiate around because they come from panic or confusion, and there are betrayals that show you the blueprint. This was a blueprint. I took screenshots. Then I exported the thread, sent it to myself, saved it to cloud storage, and printed it. The old habit again. Preserve before you feel. Tessa removed me and no one said a word. The next morning my mother texted as though nothing had happened, asking whether I could call the mortgage company and smooth things over. I did not answer. Instead, I drove to Gwen's office with the screenshots and watched her read them over the rim of her glasses. When she finished, she did not say, "I'm sorry." Lawyers learn that sorry does not fix a title problem. She said, "I think it's time we prepare the 3-door letter." I asked what that was. She said, "It is the part where we stop letting them pretend they do not have choices." Gwen wrote the options in language calm enough to be almost kind. Dr. 1, Robert and Elaine could remain in the Mill Road house under a formal cost-sharing and occupancy agreement. Each party would acknowledge the recorded ownership percentages, mortgage, taxes, insurance, repairs, and capital improvements would be split according to a written formula. No renovations without signed consent. No quiet promises to Caleb. No more pretending. Door 2. I would buy out my parents' 34% share at a fair market valuation, less documented, unpaid contributions, and subject to a payment schedule that would leave them enough to relocate with dignity. Door 3. If the family position remained that Caleb was the proper heir and future owner, Caleb could begin paying the mortgage, taxes, and expenses immediately, and we would negotiate a formal transfer of obligations subject to lender approval. In plain English, if he wanted the house, he could start paying for the house. There was also a 4th door Gwen did not lead with because it sounded harsher. Partition. If no agreement could be reached, I could ask the court to force a sale or buyout. I did not want that. Revenge was not the point. A clean ledger was. We decided not to send the letter yet. Not because I wanted drama, because my family had already organized a dinner. My mother called it a chance for healing. June sent me the details. My Aunt Lorraine would be there, 2 cousins, the neighbor couple from across the road, and Caleb and Tessa. My mother was building an audience because an audience had always made me fold. This time I wanted the audience too. I printed 3 copies of the deed, 3 copies of the mortgage payment history, the refinance settlement, Gwen's legal summary, the group text screenshots, the renovation estimate, and the 3-door letter. I placed them in identical manila folders. I did not prepare a speech. Speeches can be interrupted. Documents can be read. On the cover of my own folder, I wrote one sentence: family doesn't keep a ledger, but banks do. The dinner was set for Sunday at 5. I spent the morning doing ordinary things, because ordinary things keep your hands from shaking. Laundry, groceries, client invoices. I ate a turkey sandwich standing at the counter and wondered how many daughters before me had fed themselves before walking into the room where they would finally stop being useful. At 4, I put the folders in my bag. At 4:10, I checked them again. At 4:15, I drove. The road to Mill Road passes the county fairgrounds, the feed store, and the little church where my mother had posted a smiling picture after my father's surgery, thanking God for family support. Family support had been me in a hospital chair with a phone charger and a pharmacy app open at midnight. There was no picture of that. There rarely is. As I drove, I thought about the 27-year-old version of me signing the refinance papers. She was scared. She was proud to be needed. She believed the deed protected everyone, not just herself. I do not hate her. She did what she could with the love she had. But I also knew I could not let her keep making payments from the past. The house looked the same when I pulled up. Green shutters, maple tree, porch swing. My father had never fixed, though I had bought the meat. Chain twice. There were 6 cars in the gravel drive. My mother's beige sedan, Caleb's truck, Tessa's white SUV, Aunt Lorraine's old Buick, the neighbor's car, June's blue hatchback. Tucked near the end, as promised. Through the front window I could see the dining room light, warm and yellow, the way it always looked when I was supposed to feel guilty for not wanting to go in. I sat in the car for one breath, then another. My phone buzzed. A message from June. "Oh, I'm here. Breathe. Let paper talk." I smiled. Then I picked up the bag and walked inside. They had set the table for an apology. I could feel it before anyone spoke. The good tablecloth, the roast. My father's pill organizer, placed just visibly enough beside his plate. My mother already holding a tissue. Caleb standing near the doorway, with the posture of a man prepared to be magnanimous if I surrendered quickly. Tessa bright-eyed beside him, one hand over the ring, she never stopped adjusting. Aunt Lorraine sat with her arms folded. The neighbor couple wore their church faces. June sat near the back, with her phone in her lap, not pointed at anyone, just present. I placed my bag by my chair and sat down. My mother began immediately. She said she had prayed about this. She said she wanted peace. She said my father had spent his life providing and deserved better than fear in his own home. The tissue touched her cheek at exactly the right moment. My aunt murmured, "Poor Robert." Then Caleb stood. He had clearly rehearsed. He said nobody disputed that I had helped. He used the small word on purpose. He said I had always been practical, and sometimes practical people forgot compassion. He said the will was about tradition, not rejection. He said the house should go to the son because that was how the family name continued. Then he looked at the room before looking back at me. So, he said, "Are you really going to put Mom and Dad out on the street? Because your feelings got hurt?" That was the line, the one the room had been built to receive. The cruel daughter, the sick father, the family home, the grudge. I let the silence after it stretch. A younger me would have filled it with defense. I would have tried to prove I was good. This time I let them sit inside the accusation long enough to hear what it sounded like. Then I reached into my bag and took out the folders. I said, "I am glad everyone cares about fairness tonight. Fairness works better when we all read the same paperwork." I slid one folder to Aunt Lorraine, one to the neighbor couple, and one to my father at the head of the table. My mother stared at the folders as though they were animals that had walked in from the woods. Caleb laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because his face needed something to do. I told them to turn to the page marked Deed. They did. The room changed before anyone spoke. Paper has a sound when several people realize the same thing at the same time. A small flutter, a held breath. My aunt's eyebrows drew together. The neighbor husband, a retired insurance adjuster named Mr. Hanley, pulled his glasses down his nose and read the highlighted section twice. I explained it like I explain books to a new client. 9 years ago, when the bank would not refinance the house, I brought cash to the closing and took the mortgage in my name. In exchange, the deed was changed. Not secretly, not temporarily, recorded at the county. 66% of the Mill Road house belongs to me. My mother said, "That's just paperwork." I looked at her gently. Paperwork is what banks, courts, lenders, and county recorders use when feelings disagree. Caleb snatched the folder from my father's hands. He said it did not mean what I thought it meant. He said their lawyer would fix it. He said parents could not accidentally give away their own house. Gwen's letter was the next page. I told him a lawyer had already read it. The will could leave him my father's share. It could not leave him mine. The house could not be sold, refinanced, or structurally renovated without my signature. Tessa's face went pale at the word renovated. I watched her eyes move to the estimate in the folder and understood she had finally seen the app screenshots. My father had not spoken. He stared at the deed. His finger rested under my name. Not Caleb's. Mine. For a moment he did not look traditional or stern or betrayed. He looked old and frightened, like a man discovering that a sentence he had repeated his whole life did not survive contact with the county recorder. The home goes to the son had been a belief. The deed was a fact. Caleb broke first. He pushed his chair back so hard it struck the wall. He said I had manipulated them at the closing, that I had waited 9 years to spring a trap, that no real daughter would use legal tricks against her own parents. He said I had no family loyalty. I let him spend himself. Men like Caleb mistake volume for evidence because volume has worked on quieter people. This time, every person at the table had the paper in front of them, and volume could not change the percentages. My mother moved to tears. She said, "Mara, how could you do this after everything we did for you?" That sentence is a strange one, when spoken by a woman in a house your money saved. I did not say that. I let Mr. Hanley say the more useful thing. He looked up from the folder and said, "Elaine, this is recorded. It looks valid. Ew, from her own witness. It landed harder than anything I could have said. Aunt Lorraine, who had come prepared to disapprove of me, was reading the payment history now. The total at the bottom made her lips part. 108 payments. Mortgage, taxes, repairs, fees. She looked at my mother and said, "Elaine, did you know it was this much?" My mother did not answer. My father finally looked up. His eyes found mine across the table. For 1 second I saw the apology he might have offered if pride had not been stronger than love. Then he looked at Caleb, and the old shape came back. He said, "Your brother needs a start." There it was. Even with the deed under his hand, even with 9 years of payments in black ink, even with witnesses reading the truth, his first instinct was still Caleb's future. I felt the last tender hook inside me come free. I said, "Then Caleb can choose door 3, and I opened the next page." I did not offer punishment. I offered choices. That was important to me. I had spent too many years inside a family where my only role was to prevent consequences. I was done preventing them, but I was not interested in cruelty. So I laid out the 3 doors. Door 1, my parents could remain in the house, but we would sign a formal agreement acknowledging my 66% ownership and splitting costs fairly: mortgage, taxes, insurance, repairs. No renovation, sale, or transfer without written consent. If Caleb wanted to live there, he would sign as an occupant and contribute. Door 2, I would buy out their 34% interest at fair market value and help them relocate somewhere smaller, safer, and affordable. They would have cash. They would not have a mortgage. They would not have me as a monthly safety net. Door 3, if the family believed Caleb was the true future of the property, Caleb could begin paying the mortgage, taxes, and upkeep, starting the next cycle. I would stop paying for the inheritance he claimed. I looked at him when I said that. He looked away first. My mother whispered that I had turned family into a business transaction. I said, "No. I let family live without transactions for 9 years. The bank was the one keeping a ledger. My name was the one on it. That was the moment the room stopped being a trial and became a settlement conference. My father read the 3 options. My mother cried quietly, but the tears no longer organized the room. Caleb said he would never sign anything. Tessa said, low enough that only half the table heard, "Caleb, we cannot pay that mortgage." I stood then, not dramatically. I simply stood because the meeting was over. "You do not have to decide tonight," I said. "Gwen will expect an answer within 2 weeks. If there is no answer, we file for partition and let the court decide what everyone owns. I hope we do not have to do that." Then I put on my coat and left the folders on the table like plates after a meal no one had enjoyed. The drive home was so quiet that I could hear the folders shifting on the passenger seat. The unused copies I had brought in case someone destroyed one. Nobody had. That surprised me. I think the truth had stunned them too deeply for theatrics. At the end of the gravel drive, I stopped and looked back once. The house glowed in the dark. It was still beautiful, in the way old houses are beautiful, full of other people's history and smells and unfinished repairs. I did not hate it. That mattered. I had not done any of this because I hated the house, or my parents, or even Caleb. I did it because love that requires you to disappear is not love. It is management. My phone buzzed halfway home. June. You were perfect, she wrote. Not loud, just done. Done. That was the word. I pulled over near the fairgrounds and let myself breathe. I did not cry at the dinner table. I did not cry when Caleb shouted. But in that parked car, with the dashboard lights soft and the whole county asleep around me, I cried for the version of myself who had paid and paid because she believed the next payment might finally make her impossible to exclude. Then I wiped my face, drove home, made tea, and slept 8 hours. The next morning the community group was quieter. That is how rumors reveal their spine. Once facts walk into the room, gossip suddenly develops manners. June did not post the documents. She posted one sentence: before you judge a daughter, ask who has been paying the mortgage. The comments slowed, then stopped. My mother did not call for 3 days. Caleb sent one text, calling me a thief. Tessa unfollowed me on everything and took the renovation board private, then deleted it. My father left one voicemail I did not listen to until after dinner because I no longer took family emergencies on an empty stomach. In the voicemail, he said, "We need to talk about door 1. It was the closest thing to reality I had ever heard from him. They chose door 1 because leaving was harder than fairness, and because Caleb's love for the house did not survive the first payment calculation. Gwen drafted the agreement. She wrote it so plainly that even my mother could not soften it. Ownership percentages, payment percentages, insurance, taxes, repairs over $1,000 requiring written approval. No structural changes without consent. No promises to transfer interest without legal review. We signed in Gwen's office above the hardware store. My father looked smaller in that chair than he had at his own table. My mother wore the same church face from the community group. Grief and dignity arranged carefully. Caleb did not attend. He refused to sign as an occupant, refused to contribute, and moved his tools out of the garage the next week. Tessa's white SUV stopped appearing in the driveway. The first month under the new agreement, my parents paid their share late, but they paid it. The second month, on time. By the third month, the house had a new rhythm. Not warm, not healed, but accurate. Accuracy is not the same as love, but after years of confusion, it can feel like air. I still visited after my father's cardiology appointments. I still read the discharge instructions because I am good at that, and because caring is not the same as being used. The difference is consent. I chose what I gave. I no longer gave because they had built a system around my inability to say no. My mother and I became careful with each other. Careful is not bad. People talk about reconciliation as if it means returning to the way things were. I did not want the way things were. The way things were had me paying for a seat no one set. Careful meant there were rules. Careful meant no one pretended. Caleb told relatives I had destroyed the family over paperwork. I let him. By then, enough people had seen the paperwork to understand that paperwork was just the place where the truth had finally stopped being polite. And my father's line changed. Not in public, not as an apology, but once, after a checkup. He looked at the house through the windshield and said, It looks different when you know who saved it. I said, yes, it does. A year later, I still own my condo. My business is steady. And the first of the month is no longer a small private panic. The mortgage does not come out of my account automatically. Nothing in my life leaves without my consent anymore. That may sound small to someone who has never been the family safety net. To me, it is the sound of freedom. I visit the Mill Road house twice a month, sometimes more if my father's health requires it. I bring groceries when I want to. I pick up prescriptions when I choose to. I do not cover Caleb's rent. I do not answer late-night texts about emergencies without asking what exactly the emergency is and who else has been called. Boundaries did not make me cruel. They made my kindness honest. My mother never apologized in the way people imagine. She never sat me down and said, "Mara, we used you." But she no longer tells the town that I abandoned them. She no longer says family doesn't keep a ledger. She has learned that ledgers can be mercy when everyone signs them willingly. Caleb and I barely speak. I used to think that would feel like a wound forever. It doesn't. Some accounts close because there is no activity worth preserving. Tessa married someone else with a townhouse and, I assume, a renovation budget that did not involve my signature. On my office wall, in a frame beside my license, hangs a copy of the deed, not because property is love, not because winning is the point, because every woman who enters my office with a shoebox of receipts and an embarrassed smile deserves to know that the paper matters. The names matter. The signatures matter. The things you are told are just paperwork may be the only part of the room telling the truth. My parents wrote me out of a will because they believed I had already been provided for. What they did not understand was that I was the one doing the providing. And the day I stopped paying to be invisible was the day the whole family finally had to see me. That's my story. 9 years, 108 payments, 1 will and 1 deed. They forgot was real. If this reminded you to read the documents with your name on them, or to stop funding a table that never sets a place for you, take that as your sign. Share this with someone who needs it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. There is one last thing I want to say before I leave you tonight, because it took me longer than it should have to understand it. Being dependable is not the same as being owned. Being generous is not the same as being available forever. And being the child who can handle the truth does not mean you should always be the child who has to absorb the lie. For years, I believed that if I was useful enough, careful enough, gracious enough, then one day the balance would even itself out. Someone would notice. Someone would say, "We could not have done this without you." Someone would make a place at the table without me having to point at the empty chair. That day never came because I was waiting for people who benefited from my silence to become uncomfortable with it. Most people do not voluntarily give up comfort purchased by someone else. The change came when I stopped arguing over whether I deserved appreciation and started acting on what the documents already proved. I did not need my parents to agree that I mattered. I needed them to stop spending money and property as though I did not. I did not need Caleb to admit that he had been carried. I needed him to decide whether he wanted the house badly enough to carry it himself. He did not. That answer was painful, but it was clean. So if you are listening to this with a bill in your name, a deed you have not read, a loan you signed because someone cried, or a family story that only works if your contribution stays invisible, let this be the gentle warning I wish someone had given me. Read everything. Save everything. Ask what happens if you stop. The answer may hurt, but it will also show you the architecture of your life. And if the people who love you only love the version of you that pays, fixes, drives, rescues, and disappears, you are allowed to become a version of yourself they do not recognize. They may call it selfish. They may call it cold. They may say, you changed. Maybe you did. Maybe you finally became accurate.